The clock on Sierra Grill's wall ticked to 2:13 p.m. as Megan, a 23-year-old waitress, swiped sweat from her brow. A toddler hurled fries at her feet. A customer snapped, "Medium rare means pink, sweetheart." Her phone buzzed. Another one-star Yelp review. "2 more hours," she hissed. "Just survive 2 more hours." That's when he walked in. The old man in the battered Stetson didn't pause at the chaos. He strode to the corner booth like he owned the place. Because he did. Megan barely glanced at him. "Water, please," he said, his gravelly voice cutting through the noise. "Coming right up," she lied, her smile cracking. A ketchup bottle slipped from her tray. The man's boot nudged it back. She didn't notice, but he did. He watched her snap at customers, roll her eyes at split checks, and mutter, "Ma'am, seriously?" under her breath. When she slammed his burger down, he finally spoke. "Rough day." "Just peachy," she spat, storming off. What Megan didn't know? In 15 minutes, this stranger would cost her $287 in unpaid rent and every excuse she'd ever made. Because Hollywood legend didn't believe in bad days. Megan tried to avoid table 12 for as long as she could, focusing on clearing plates and taking new orders. Yet every time she glanced toward the corner, the man seemed to be watching her. Not in a creepy way, but with a calm, almost assessing gaze. It made her skin crawl, though she couldn't understand why. Her coworker Danny nudged her as he passed. "Hey, table 12's yours," he said with a grin. Megan sighed, grabbing her notepad and pasting on her forced, well-practiced smile. "What can I get you today?" she asked, her tone laced with impatience, despite her attempt to sound polite. The man looked up, his sharp eyes scanning her face for a moment. Megan felt an odd twinge, as if he were looking right through her. "Just a burger," he said calmly, his gravelly voice carrying a weight that instantly silenced the noise around them in her mind. Megan jotted it down quickly. "Burger, got it. Anything else?" "No, ma'am," he replied, tipping his hat slightly. The word "ma'am" grated on her nerves. She rolled her eyes as she walked back to the kitchen, muttering under her breath, "Seriously? Ma'am?" In the kitchen, she tried to shake off her irritation, but the man's calm demeanor kept gnawing at her. He didn't fit the mold of the other customers, rude, demanding, or snapping their fingers. He was different, but Megan couldn't decide if that made him better or worse. When the burger was ready, Megan brought it to his table, placing it down with less care than usual. "Here you go," she said, brushing a strand of hair from her face and placing a bottle of ketchup next to the plate. "Anything else?" The man glanced at the burger, then back at her. "No, this looks just fine," he said, his tone polite yet firm, as though he had weighed every word before speaking. Megan lingered for a second longer than necessary, her frustration building. Something about him just rubbed her the wrong way. His unshakable calmness felt like a silent judgment on her chaotic life. "You're not from around here, are you?" she blurted out, leaning slightly on the table's edge. "No, I'm not," he said simply, cutting his burger with deliberate precision. "Thought so," she said, smirking. "The hat gave it away. Looks like you just stepped out of an old Western movie." For the first time, the man smiled. Not a full grin, but a faint curve of his lips. "Something like that," he replied. She expected him to get defensive, maybe even annoyed, but his response only added to her irritation. Who did this guy think he was, sitting there so calmly while she dealt with one headache after another? "You know," she said, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret, "most people around here don't show up looking like they just came from a ranch." He didn't respond right away. Instead, he took a slow, measured bite of his burger, chewing thoughtfully. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he said, "I guess I'm not most people." His words, simple as they were, carried a weight that made Megan's smirk falter for a split second. A flicker of embarrassment crept up, but she quickly buried it. "Well, enjoy your meal," she said, pushing off the table and walking away before he could say anything else. She was sure she'd gotten the last word. Yet as she cleared another table nearby, she noticed him watching her again. Not with anger or irritation, but with that same calm, assessing gaze. It was unsettling, as if he were seeing something in her she didn't even see in herself. Little did she know, that look would soon change the course of her day and her life in ways she could never have imagined. The lunch rush began to wind down, and the restaurant finally quieted. Megan leaned against the counter, scrolling through her phone, trying to reclaim some sense of normalcy. Her gaze flicked to table 12, where the man was finishing his meal. He seemed completely at ease, sipping his water and glancing around the room like he had all the time in the world. Her coworker Danny walked by, a smirk on his face. "Hey, Megan, isn't it weird how calm that guy is? Like he's just taking it all in." Megan rolled her eyes, not in the mood for small talk. "Yeah, well, some people don't have anything better to do," she replied, her tone dismissive. Danny chuckled and shrugged. "I don't know. He looks familiar, doesn't he? Maybe he's famous or something." Megan scoffed. "Famous? Yeah, right. If he's famous, then I'm the Queen of England." Still, Danny's comment planted a small seed of doubt in her mind. She glanced at the man again, watching as he slowly pushed his plate away and leaned back in his chair. There was something about the way he carried himself, something confident yet understated. It was almost as if he owned the place. "Probably just some retired rancher," she muttered under her breath, trying to shake the feeling. Yet no matter how hard she tried to brush it off, she couldn't ignore the quiet intensity in his demeanor. It felt like he was waiting for something, and that thought made her stomach twist. When Megan finally brought him the check, she kept her tone brief. "Here's your check. Whenever you're ready," she said, forcing a smile. The man didn't reach for it right away. Instead, he looked up at her with those sharp, piercing eyes. "Do you enjoy your job?" he asked, his voice calm but deliberate. The question caught her off guard, and for a moment she couldn't think of a reply. "It's fine," she said finally, shrugging. "It's a job, you know?" He nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "A job's what you make of it," he said, "but it seems like you're carrying a lot today." The words hit harder than Megan expected, and a flicker of anger rose in her chest. Who was this guy to comment on her attitude? But before she could respond, he stood up, placed a few bills on the table, and tipped his hat. "Thanks for the meal." Megan watched the man walk toward the door, her irritation lingering as she muttered under her breath, "Yeah, whatever, cowboy." She didn't expect to see him again and was eager to move on from the encounter. But just as he reached the exit, something happened that made Megan freeze in her tracks. From the back office, Carol, the no-nonsense manager of Sierra Grill, rushed out. Her usually stern face lit up with a wide smile as she approached the man with outstretched hands. "Mr. Hollywood legend!" Carol exclaimed, her voice filled with excitement and respect. "I wasn't expecting you today." Megan's stomach dropped. She replayed the name in her head, disbelief spreading across her face. Hollywood legend? No way. It can't be. Her eyes darted back to the man, now standing near the entrance with a faint smile as he shook Carol's hand. The room seemed to spin as realization set in. Hollywood legend. Megan's heart pounded as she stood rooted to the spot, her notepad clutched tightly in her hand. The gruff, unassuming man she had judged and dismissed wasn't just some random customer. He was the Hollywood legend. And not only that, he was the owner of the very restaurant where she worked. As if to confirm her worst fears, Hollywood legend glanced back over his shoulder, his sharp eyes meeting hers for a brief moment. There was no anger in his expression, only a knowing look that made Megan's cheeks burn with embarrassment. He nodded slightly, almost as if to acknowledge the gravity of the moment, before stepping out into the sunlight and disappearing. Megan's mind raced. Every snarky comment, every eye roll, every ounce of impatience she'd shown him now, replayed in excruciating detail. How could she have been so blind, so careless? "Megan!" Carol's voice jolted her out of her thoughts. "Can you believe it? Mr. Hollywood legend stopped by today. He's been so busy lately, I haven't seen him in weeks." Yeah," Megan stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Wow." Carol didn't seem to notice Megan's discomfort as she continued. "You know, this place means the world to him. He's so hands-on. Every detail here is something he personally approved. That's why I always remind the staff to bring their best. You never know when he'll stop by." Megan felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Her chest tightened as Carol's words sank in. Bring their best, she thought bitterly. Well, I definitely didn't do that today. Danny, who had been standing nearby, noticed Megan's pale face. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked, nudging her arm gently. I, I think I need a minute, she muttered, retreating to the break room before anyone could press further. The moment the door closed behind her, Megan let out a shaky breath and sank into a chair. Her hands trembled as she buried her face in them, her mind replaying every detail of her interaction with Hollywood legend. The words, "a job's what you make of it," echoed in her head, now taking on an entirely new weight. She had worked at Sierra Grill for 2 years, and in all that time, she had never bothered to listen to the stories about the mysterious owner. If she had, maybe she would have recognized him, or at least thought twice before letting her frustration get the better of her. The humiliation was unbearable, but beyond that, there was something else, something deeper. Hollywood legend's calm demeanor, his composed responses, his parting words. They weren't just observations. They were lessons, and Megan couldn't shake the feeling that she had failed some sort of unspoken test. What now, she thought, her chest tightening with anxiety. What if Hollywood legend told Carol about her attitude? What if she got fired? Rent was due in 2 weeks and her student loans were piling up. She couldn't afford to lose this job. Yet even as the fear of consequences loomed, Megan couldn't deny that the encounter had struck a chord. For the first time in a long time, she felt the uncomfortable weight of accountability pressing down on her. One thing was clear. Things couldn't stay the way they were. Megan couldn't get Hollywood legend's words out of her mind. They replayed over and over, each time sinking a little deeper. Every interaction's an opportunity. Use it well. She didn't know how to start making changes, but one thing was clear. She had to try. The next day, Megan walked into work with a different mindset. She didn't want to be the frustrated, snarky server anymore. Instead, she wanted to take control of her attitude and see if kindness really could make a difference. Her first test came sooner than she expected. A frazzled mom with 3 kids walked in, her toddler immediately spilling a soda across the table. Megan's first instinct was to sigh and roll her eyes, but Hollywood legend's words echoed in her head. Instead, she grabbed a rag and hurried over, smiling as she said, "Don't worry, it happens to the best of us." The mom looked up, visibly relieved. "Thank you," she said. "It's been a rough day." Megan nodded, offering to bring extra napkins and a new drink. The interaction was small, but it left Megan feeling lighter than she had in weeks. Later that afternoon, an elderly couple asked her to repeat the specials not once, but 3 times. Megan could feel her patience being tested, but she kept her voice steady and her tone warm. She even threw in her own recommendations, which made the couple smile and thank her profusely. The more effort she put into treating people kindly, the more Megan began to notice a change, not just in how others responded to her, but in how she felt about herself. Her shifts were still exhausting, but there was a new sense of purpose behind her actions. One particularly busy evening, Carol pulled Megan aside as the restaurant began to quiet down. "You've been working here for a while," Carol said, folding her hands on her desk, "and I've noticed a change in you lately. A good one." Megan blinked, unsure how to respond. "Oh, thank you," she said, her voice uncertain. Carol continued, "I don't know what brought it on, but whatever you're doing, keep it up. The customers have noticed too. One of them even left a comment card praising your service." Megan felt her chest swell with pride. She hadn't expected anyone to notice, let alone acknowledge her efforts. When she left Carol's office that night, a small smile tugged at her lips. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was on the right path. Megan still had a long way to go, but every step forward felt like a small victory. As she locked up the restaurant that evening, she glanced at the Sierra Grill sign and thought about Hollywood legend. He'd walked in as a stranger, but his words had left a mark on her life that she wouldn't soon forget. Over the next few weeks, Megan continued to embrace her newfound approach. She wasn't perfect. There were still moments when customers tested her patience, and bad days didn't just vanish overnight, but she was determined to keep Hollywood legend's lesson at the forefront of her mind. Each shift brought new challenges. There were customers who snapped their fingers at her, spilled drinks without apologizing, and complained about things beyond her control. Yet Megan handled them differently now. Instead of sighing or rolling her eyes, she smiled and responded with calm professionalism. It wasn't always easy, but she noticed something remarkable. Her efforts were paying off. Customers began to thank her more sincerely. Some even left generous tips, which felt like small victories after months of disappointment. Co-workers like Danny started noticing the change in her too, teasing her about being the customer whisperer. One evening, as the dinner rush began to slow, Carol called Megan into the office. Megan's stomach twisted with nerves as she walked in, fearing she had somehow messed up again. "Megan," Carol began, folding her hands on her desk, "you've been working here for a while now, and I've been meaning to talk to you." Megan braced herself for bad news, her heart racing. "I've noticed a real change in you lately," Carol continued, her tone warm. "A good one. You've been more patient, more attentive, and the customers have noticed too." Megan blinked, unsure of what to say. "Oh, thank you," she stammered. Carol smiled and leaned back in her chair. "You know, one of our regulars left a comment card the other day. They said you were the most polite and helpful server they've ever had here. That's not something I hear every day." Megan felt a rush of pride and disbelief. "Really?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Really," Carol confirmed. "Whatever you're doing, keep it up. It's making a difference." As Megan left the office, she felt a strange mixture of emotions. Pride was the strongest, but there was also a sense of gratitude for the lesson Hollywood legend had taught her and for the chance to grow into someone she could be proud of. That night, as she locked up the restaurant, Megan took a moment to look at the Sierra Grill sign. It wasn't just a job anymore. It was a place where she could grow, learn, and make a difference. She owed it all to Hollywood legend, the quiet cowboy who had walked into her life at just the right time. As Megan walked home that night, Hollywood legend's words echoed in her mind again. "Every interaction's an opportunity. Use it well." They had become more than just advice. They were a reminder of how much she had changed. When Hollywood legend first walked into the Sierra Grill, she had been someone who let her frustrations define her. She judged people too quickly, held on to anger too easily, and rarely thought about the impact of her actions. But now every day was a chance to do better, to be better. Megan's transformation didn't just affect her job, it started to influence other parts of her life. She found herself being more patient with friends and family, more understanding with strangers, and even kinder to herself. The small changes added up, and for the first time in years, she felt like she was heading in the right direction. She couldn't help but think back to that day, to Hollywood legend's calm gaze and the quiet wisdom in his voice. He hadn't scolded her or demanded an apology. Instead, he had simply shown her another way to live, one built on kindness, patience, and integrity. As she neared her apartment, Megan realized that Hollywood legend's impact on her life wasn't just about her job or her attitude. It was about the way she chose to treat others, even on her hardest days. The next morning, Megan arrived at work with a renewed sense of purpose. She greeted customers with a genuine smile, took pride in her work, and didn't let the small frustrations get to her. Her coworkers noticed the difference, and so did the regulars. Every now and then, Megan caught herself glancing at the door, half expecting Hollywood legend to walk in again. Maybe he would, or maybe he wouldn't. Either way, his lesson had already changed her life. Sometimes the smallest interactions have the biggest impact, and every moment, no matter how ordinary it seems, is a chance to become someone better. If this story inspired you, don't forget to hit the like button and share it with someone who could use a little encouragement. And make sure to subscribe for more real-life lessons that remind us all to be a little kinder every day.